in covering the police department since I got here, there is sort of this pattern of, okay, now we're going to do this. Now, we're going to expand community policing now. Okay, we're going to change our youth interactions policy. Okay, well, since the community is upset about this, we're going to do this. And Chief Payne has been one of the people internally at GRPD who's been most involved in trying to build those bridges between the community. And you do see officers who are trying to do that. If you go to the Boys and Girls Club, you'll see police officers there trying to build connections with young people. It's not as if those things haven't happened. There's been lots of community meetings, lots of city council meetings, like city commission meetings. All of those discussions have happened. Policies have changed. And yet, we still continue to see these incidents, which most people in the city find unacceptable, where officers will be pulling weapons on young children, or tasers or guns. They will use force.
Or just detaining them with handcuffs while they do something. And the trauma, if you took one of my daughters and a police officer handcuffed them when they did nothing wrong, the psychology of that and the long-term sort of view of how safe are we is fragile. And I don't know, so these things have big consequences. Of course, they make a huge splash when something seems obviously, unnecessary.
Yeah, and we had another incident in the city. So that particular incident, I think the one you're referring to where the young girl was handcuffed, that caused an uproar. They changed a policy. They came up with a new youth interaction policy. And just months after that happened, you saw officers pull a gun on young children, and you saw children crying in the video, and that was completely okay under the policy, under the new policy, which had been reviewed. And I think my understanding of it is if you talk to an officer, they will say things like, well, we just pulled a gun off of a 15-year-old last week or something like that. Well, we got a call of, two young black men in red shirts, and we think they had a gun. And a police officer will say, if we think the suspect has a gun, what we want to do is show overwhelming force from the start. They'll call it, I think it's called a felony stop. So they immediately pull their weapon on the suspect, and they wait for backup, which means they could be there for several minutes, pointing their gun at this young child. And then other police officers may show up and point their gun at the young person. And to them, that is a safe interaction, and that is a well-executed stop. They followed their policy. They tried to keep people safe, and that is considered good policing to do things that way. As a community member, of course, it's appalling. It's terrifying.
Yeah. A
grown person pointing a gun at a child. Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely unacceptable and traumatizing to the child, to the whole community, and it happens repeatedly. And I think, the place where we're at right now is that these things have happened so frequently and have continued to happen in the past several years. And the city has said, go through the process. We'll change the policy again. We'll do this. We'll have more community meetings. We want to hear from the community. But stops like that are still considered, quote, good policing, and so they still continue to happen. And you have a number of people now who are in this city and in many other cities who say, we've tried the right way.
Yeah.
We've had these conversations. What else can we do to make sure this stops?
Well, there's what you do when in that situation where they follow the safest, and from their perspective, the safest way to conduct a stop like that of any kind. The balance of power is upside down, and you're removing the power. They're doing everything that they can to mitigate the risk to that officer or any officer. That's their number one priority. It isn't finding out first. Their first priority isn't to determine really anything except the officers responding are not going to be hurt.
Right.
When that is your blind solo, like laser focus on any particular stop, you lose a lot of information in that. And you also, I think, inflict the type of damage that you're talking about.
And it's pretty hard to do more harm in that one interaction to community relations that you've been trying to build up over years. And I think, what makes it such a big issue is that is because it's not a neutral proposition. In a city as segregated as ours, in a city with a history like ours, with housing segregation, with racial segregation, those stops don't happen in my neighborhood,
Right.
in my white neighborhood.
Yeah.
I hardly ever see the police.
Right.
If you live in a neighborhood that was historically redlined, south of Wealthy, you see police all the time. You'll see stops like that all the time. It's practically a thing in this city for white people who've started to gentrify south of Wealthy to now have witnessed some of these things. I've seen it myself, actually. I saw one of those stops on Wealthy. There was a person who called into a city commission meeting last week who said, I recently moved to Baxter, and she didn't really know the situation she was in. She identified herself as white, and she said, I saw the police pull their guns on a black man, and it totally changed her perspective. She witnessed it. She saw it. Now, if you're black in this city, you've been seeing it all along. Mm-hmm. You know, it's happened to all your friends, and so it's not surprising at all. And one of the reasons why I think it's so widespread is that in the case that I witnessed on Wealthy, I spoke to the police after. They pulled these two young men over. There were like 5 police cars, guns pointed. They made the 2 young men kneel in the street, and
by young men, weren't they around 14 or something?
Well, so the one that I witnessed, this is one that wasn't.
This is the one you witnessed.
This is the one that I saw personally
Yeah.
on Wealthy. So they were maybe 18, 19, and they stayed calm. I couldn't believe how calm these 2 young men were. I mean, I was terrified, and the guns weren't pointed at me. But they remained calm, and I talked to the officers afterward. I was kind of livid. I mean, my adrenaline was pumping, and I was there with my children, and I was like, if one of your shots went off the wrong way, I would have been hurt. And the officers were like, well, we had a robbery earlier in the day, and we got a call that it was 2 young black men in a blue car. So that information was enough for them to make a stop and to point their guns all at these 2 young men. Now, these 2 young men were innocent, but are you going to pull over every black man in a blue car in this city? When the calls come in like that, the Grand Rapids Police is assuming every young black man with a red T-shirt or in a blue car or whatever is that suspect with a gun. And the end result over years and years and years is that half the city's young black men have had cops' guns pointed at them.
Right, and you wouldn't take the same sort of stop sort of procedure, I don't imagine, in East Grand Rapids, where you would say, okay, there's a white 4-door sedan with 2 white teenagers in it. Again, I think it would be rare that a random car would get pulled over at gunpoint. They might invest. They might pull them over. They might act, you know what I mean? But I don't.
The other thing is that type of crime is just much less likely to happen in a historically white neighborhood because there hasn't been this history of disinvestment. I mean, why do all black, why are people of color disproportionately in neighborhoods where there's poverty? Because of the housing segregation, because of the mortgage discrimination, because of racial covenants, because of the generational poverty that has been forced on communities of color. And what happens in neighborhoods where there's extreme poverty? Crime.
Right. This Full Exposure podcast episode has been made possible through the support of Metro Health, University of Michigan Health, and Dr. Peter Hahn, who believe that creativity and the arts are essential to a rich, healthy, and fulfilling life.